And that's an extremely important subject, the non-randomness of the geographical location of impacts as well as the non-randomness in time. But let's assume that people as smart as ourselves have been around for 150 or 2,000 years. What would we do if confronted with the foreknowledge that there was going to be a major global event that could perhaps wipe out 90% of the human population?
Massive anarchy.
What would we do? Well, let's say this. Okay, right now we've got scientific and political and military elites that have access to technologies that we mere mortals don't usually have. Let's say, for example, NASA sees something out there. Not just a single thing. Let's say it sees a cosmic entourage headed our way. And it'll be coming around our part of the cosmic neighborhood, let's say in 2 to 5 years. What would we do? Do we inform people? Do we tell the population at large? Or do certain, I'll call them elites, do they decide that they're going to do something to ensure or to maximize the probabilities of their survival? I would think that would be a very likely scenario. Well, they have done that. Certainly we can see that they did that in response to the possibility of a nuclear war, of a global nuclear war, went to great lengths to ensure that there could be the survival of an elite. But what if instead of a human-induced catastrophe, we're talking about a nature-induced catastrophe? What would we do? He passed away a few years ago. He was Grand Master of Masons in Georgia when I was Master of my lodge in 1990, and he and I used to talk fairly extensively about stuff because I wanted to find out just how much he really did know. And I have no reason to assume he wasn't coming clean with me. And he said, oh yeah, there's a lot of mysteries and a lot of hidden stuff, but you know, nobody's really got the background to make sense out of it, you know. Nobody really, it's almost like we're confronted with this esoteric science, but we don't really have the language or the intellectual means to make sense of, or the motivation. Maybe it's the motivation, you know. I mean, we're preoccupied with other things in our modern society. But, I mean, I've gone through the 32 degrees of the 33 and have looked at what's there, and I certainly will affirm that there is a lot there. And I pull in a lot of that stuff, and I usually bring it out, but without overtly saying this is something that I extracted from Masonry, you know. But yeah, and I feel like we've barely scratched the surface of what that whole tradition means. I think it's been handed down for thousands of years, but essentially just handed on, and here's this whole thing, and I mean, it's just like the Grail. We pass it down, but nobody really knows what it means, but we keep passing it down until eventually it falls into the hands of somebody who's ready to make sense out of it, to decipher it, whether that's an individual or a brotherhood or a group or a generation, I don't know. But it certainly does seem to me that that's something that a phase that we're in now, is recovering so much of this ancient knowledge. And one of the observations I've made is that, you know, we've lost so much of the ancient tradition, either through the vagaries of social evolution or deliberately through suppression and so forth. We've lost so much of it. So we're getting this incomplete body of knowledge that we've inherited from the past, of the ancient knowledge, but then we have the modern scientific knowledge, and of course it's very materialistically oriented for the most part, but within the last 2 decades, of course, we've seen that modern science has come upon the limits of a purely physical description of reality, and there are large gaps and vacancies within the edifice of modern knowledge, and there are large gaps in the edifices and vacancies within, vacancies within the ancient knowledge, as in it turns out when you start putting it together, they seem like they actually mesh quite effectively, and the prominences on one fill the vacancies on the other, and vice versa. I mean, that's why I so much go back and forth between here's what modern science is discovering and here's what the ancient wisdom is saying. So, I mean, we spent several lectures talking about the Holy Grail and slowly worked our way to the conclusion that the Holy Grail, one very totally valid interpretation, not the final interpretation of the Grail mystery, but one key component of that is recognizing that the Grail was a disguised way of describing comets. And it makes perfect sense, once you begin to decipher something and you first discover those first few correlations that allows you then to go from translating mere letters into words and then from words to sentences. That's kind of where we're at with this thing. And I mean, there's just so much. There's way more than one person can do. What's needed is a university that's established whose major function is to synthesize the ancient science and the modern science, and out of that synthesis will emerge the future science, which can then galvanize the next evolutionary stage of human beings into the gods that we were designed and programmed to become. But we're not there yet, people.
Yeah, but back to the going underground thing.
Oh, okay, let's get back to the going underground thing.
They're talking about a catastrophe coming in 2012, and they're talking about the preparations that the government has taken with, I think the population of that country is 3 million, and they have managed to build enough underground space to put in 1.5 million people, and this guy got pissed off because he says, why do we need to lose half the people, and that's why he went public with the whole thing.
Now, who's doing this? The government's. Well, what do they believe is going to happen in 2012?
Catastrophe. An impact.
An impact of
significant proportions.
Yeah.
Well, of course, the thing I would ask is, what evidence is there to support the conclusion that there's going to be a catastrophe in 2012?
The Hopi Indians, I mean, they're one of the oldest races on the North American continent. And in all four world mythos of the Hopi, they went underground as the crust shifted and whatever,
Sure.
stayed underground. And their temple, where they worship to this day, are Kivas,
Right.
which are underground chambers.
Mm-hmm.
And once they've done their ceremonies and they're finished with their prayers, they reenact coming out from under the earth again.
The emergence.
All the time.
Mm-hmm.
They do this in every worship service they do at Harvey and up on the mesas in Arizona. So, I mean, that. But it's interesting because what they claim is that the destructions are inevitably because of the decadence of the groups of people who end up here. Like the civilizations run to a certain point, they become decadent, corrupt, begin to self-destruct, which then leads to a critical mass where they succeed in self-destructing. And then once that destruction is over, a certain group of people who have managed to stay out of the fray and out of the corrupting influences or whatever, preserve the purity and the integrity and whatever, and they become the seed race of the next world.
Yes.
And so that fits right into the 2012. That's what this is. 2012 is the end of fourth world and the beginning of fifth world. And because the Book of Hopi has these planetary destructions where they have to go inside the earth, during each of these, reported by them, myths or legends of these four destructions, there may well be another destruction, some sort of cataclysmic event coming on 2012. Just based on, the chronology of Hopi philosophy, and their current prophecies are very pointed that this is what they're expecting to happen again. The gourd full of ashes being dropped, all this stuff. I mean, they all, they were prophesying this stuff a long time before the invention of the nuclear bomb.
And so they're in alignment with the Aztecs, too, with the 2012.
I don't know what relationship the Hopis have to the Aztecs.
But, I mean, I'm just saying their stories they're both talking about 2000.
Well, it's the Mayan calendar.
Well, that Mesoamerican calendar covered pretty much all. I mean, from Chaco Canyon, what they taught in Chaco, what they taught in all these places, I'm sure had a consistency among all of the Mesoamerican civilizations, because they were very much in contact with each other.
Yes. That is pretty certain. I mean, I think we can tell that by the trade goods they were all using.
Right.
They were trading with each other extensively. And the southwestern cultures were trading with Mississippian cultures
Right.
at the same time. So it's very possible that there was almost like a unified culture
Right.
up until several centuries before the arrival of Europeans. Well, I just, of course, this 2012 thing's been around for a long time, but as obviously somebody, a self-confessed catastrophist and somebody who believes in catastrophes and that there will be another catastrophe inevitably showing up, other than just, people surmising things hypothetically, I have not seen any hard evidence that there would be anything
Right. Yeah. I was just.
to that. I mean,
As an allegory.
John Major Jenkins has written a whole book about the astronomy of 2012, and it is significant because, the winter solstice aligns with the center of the galaxy.
Right.
But when you consider that that's the result of precessional movement, the winter solstice is between now and 2012 is only going to move 200 seconds of arc. So, I mean, to the naked eye, that's almost indistinguishable. If you went out and could exactly pinpoint the winter solstice and exactly pinpoint the center of the galaxy, which in its own sense has not been defined with that level of precision, exactly where the center of we already say that the winter solstice is aligned with the center of the galaxy. And I could certainly see that, those kinds of marker points would certainly serve as like datum points or fiduciary points to say, let's use this to measure our cycles from. Some obvious astronomical event that can be ascertained with a fair degree of precision, even knowing, since they built their infrastructure astronomically, it was easy to make very accurate astronomical observations of, the equinox points, the solstice points, and so on. And it would seem to me that, it would make sense that you would have to have certain datum points in any kind of calendrical system, if nothing else, to adjust your calendar periodically. And so far, that's the only thing I've gotten out of 2012. Now, is there some hidden prediction about something cosmic returning? That would be the kind of thing I would be looking for. Is there any evidence that they were aware of, say, a large comet that was on a cyclical return that was going to bring it close back in at 2012? I would have a difficult time imagining how somebody, even astronomers with the knowledge and accuracy of Mayans and many of the others, would be able to predict that there would be a specific impact event. Right now, the 2029 event, they're discussing how close is it going to come. Is it going to be, half the distance to the moon, a quarter the distance to the moon, or could it possibly strike the Earth? And nobody can agree. Although I think the conclusion is no, it's not going to strike the Earth. But what could happen is with that close pass by in 2029, that it slightly alters its path so that when it comes back again in, I believe, 2036, it might make a direct hit. But now you're talking about scientists, astronomers who are using, the most accurate, high-powered optical instruments, on Earth, and they're not able to predict something more than 2 or 3 decades in advance. A year or two in advance, yes. 20 or 30 years, no. So I would be, as much as I respect and the profound awe that I have for the science of the ancient world, I would really question whether somebody from, hundreds or thousands or even hundreds of years ago could have made a prediction that Earth will be impacted by something in 2012. On the other hand, if something is coming around regularly, a large comet that we don't know about, that could return, it could influence things on Earth without impacting Earth, certainly.
What about Planet X or the 12th planet? Whatever you want to call it.
That's a possibility too, yes. What Paul just said, the idea of a 12th planet or something, a dark companion that we don't know about that returns.
Sitchin says that this new planet that they're calling Planet X is Nibiru.
What new planet? What new planet would that be?
Planet X.
Planet X that the scientists are calling Planet X, he says that is not Nibiru.
Well, when was it, the picture taken, or when was it discovered? You got all the information on that.
When was it discovered?
They found it in 72, and they photographed it in 82. They just built a $4 billion telescope in the middle of Antarctica that is fully automatically remote controlled from New Zealand. And it went online the first day of March this year, and I've got in to get some of the photographs on it.
It's cracking it.
Well, pull some strings. I'd like to see that, Sam. My initial response is going to be similar to a lot of the response to a lot of the things that I've heard since the late 60s about what's going to happen is, well, show me the evidence. Show me the evidence. I'd be open to it, but I want to see the evidence.
I agree with you. You know, and I don't know whether it's going to happen or not, but I do know this: there's a lot of evidences that's happened before. So.
Oh, well, there's a lot of evidences that something has happened before. Catastrophes have happened. Of that, there's no question.
One of the things that I've come up with the other day, a lot of people don't know it, but Halley's Comet can vary as much as 3 years. And it's been coming through. We can go back into the Assyrians' writings 7, 8, 9, 10,000 years ago. The Egyptians, they knew about Halley's Comet every 75 years. But it don't come every 75 years. It may come 72 up to 77. It can be about a 5-year variance over a number of centuries. But 75 seems to be the average of what it comes through.
Okay.
Anyway.
Well, we got off the track before I let the cat out of the bag, so that's probably a good thing.
You got about 15
Yes.
minutes too. Bring it to point.
Randall, this explanation of the 2012, it says.
Don't ask me, because that would be my question to you. Well, how are they
Well,
measuring the
that's-
Milky Way
that was-
cycle?
I know, well, that was my question.
I mean, I think they're doing damn good to measure the precessional cycle of
Yeah.
26,000 years, which is realistic.
You were saying there's an object, or if there was a possible object.
Well, now in the case of fires, caves would probably be a very good place to hide out. In the case of large-scale floods, caves might not be the best place to take refuge. Unless you've got your scuba equipment, right? In fact, you know, I haven't presented this material, but I have a lot of material on the various bone beds that are found in caves, and particular where they call them ossiferous fissures. They used to call them in the 19th century when they would find them. And if Paul will bear with me for just a second, I will show you something here. I think we have it. Oh. Let's see what we got here. Let's see. Yeah, here's at Cowboy Cave in the canyonlands of southeastern Utah, a stratified deposit of bison dung terminates abruptly at about 11,000 years BP. The Cowboy Cave record suggests that as a biotic phenomena, the mechanism causing terminal Wisconsin extinction had an impact even on those genera that ultimately survived the event, which I think is a very crucial insight, because a lot of times people would think that it was only affecting the species. This is I've shown you this, but some of you haven't seen this. This is, every one of those little squares represents the finding of the remains of an extinct animal. And so what you can see here is then they found the remains and they radiocarbon dated them. And you can see right here that at the end of the Pleistocene is this major spike of animal mortality that shows that here you've got the normal background losses, and then suddenly you've got this huge mortality event. There are lots of examples, and I have them on here somewhere. I guess this is just, I don't want to waste your time looking for something. But many examples of these bone fissures, they call them, bone fissures and bone caves, where it has all the earmarks of animals being washed into a fissure in the rocks, and down in the rocks what they find is hundreds of animal bones interstratified with alluvium and what appears to be flood deposits. So the point being is that once we finally get, notice here what the two of the top paleohydrologists on the planet, Kumotsu, Kloot, three of them, and Baker. Baker was the one who did the studies of the Missoula flood back in the 70s and who spearheaded the studies of Martian mega-scale flooding, Victor Baker. But back 9 years ago, after between the three of them studying many years the effects of these giant floods, this is what they concluded, is that planetary scale movement of water has been a major agent in shaping the landscape of our planet. Planetary scale. Now this is not coming from crackpot New Agers, this is coming from the most knowledgeable scientists about paleohydrological events living today. And they're exclaiming that planetary scale movement of water has been a major agent in shaping the landscape of the planet. So when you talk about, legends of global floods that we've inherited, this is not something, outside the realm of what has been scientifically confirmed at this point. Yet, this has not entered mainstream knowledge. It's not part of the general equation of humanity to recognize this kind of event and what it might mean for us. But what I was getting at, let's say that 12,000 years ago, there was a planetary scale movement of water. And let's say in 1994, scientists, astronomers were able to predict the impact of 21 pieces of a fragmenting comet into the southern hemisphere of Jupiter. They were able to predict really even the morning that it was going to occur and the hemisphere that it was going to occur. Now, when you go through all of the myths, what I've tried to show over the last couple of years by, belaboring this evidence is that these great floods and stories of cosmic disaster really happened. Okay, if we accept that, yes, this story about a flood and people surviving by building great boats and arks or climbing mountaintops or going into caves, mostly you'll find that taking refuge in caves is associated with cosmic firestorms. That's people usually aren't described as surviving the floods by going in caves. They survive the floods by either going to a mountaintop, by building an ark, or there's a third way. What is the third way? The gods, here's an example. The gods let down a rope ladder, and people climbed the rope ladder to the heavens. And after the cataclysm, they're then restored to the earth. What if future evidence discloses that that image has as much veracity as the image of planetary scale movement of water?
We'd like it.
What would happen if it turned out that human beings have already left this planet in times of global catastrophe? See, then what happens is we have to rethink the whole idea of who are the gods? What are the gods? Is the gods ourselves, who've taken a parallel path of evolution, but not of this planet, perhaps? Or is there, I've deliberately shied away from that, the idea of getting into UFOs and aliens and extraterrestrials, only because there's so much bullshit associated with that whole phenomenon. And it's only for that reason that I've stayed away from it. Not that I don't think that there's a valid truth to all of this weird stuff that's going on with alien abductions and crop circles. We could expand the list. The things that people see in the sky. I think there's several explanations. I think clearly one of the things we talked about a couple of months ago was energetic phenomena being induced by tectonic processes that can actually create effects, visible luminosities in the atmosphere, sounds, things that people would see and experience and perhaps equate with the idea of an unidentified flying object, when in fact what they're doing is experiencing a transference of this energy. I showed you the the slides of the energy columns that could migrate along the fault lines of the Earth. The other possibility, I think, is, of course, is that, you know, there are super secret experimental flight designs that the Pentagon is perfectly willing to let people assume are UFOs because it provides them a screen and a cover that they're working behind. I don't think that's the final explanation for it any more than I think that the energy movements that people might experience is the final explanation. I think there is a component that we do have to address, but it may be it may turn out to be that in the end, some of our cosmic visitors aren't actually coming from other stars.
They might live under the ocean, that's what Bill Cooper said.
Well, just ponder that to yourselves quietly. Don't immediately profane the idea by going, "Hey, I think it was this." Let's let it sink in. Because remember the inner meaning of the message on the Ande stone? It is written that life takes refuge in a single space. Remember that? This is like we're going back 2 years ago. You remember that? It is written that life takes refuge in a single space. Where is that single space? Well, certainly when we look at the tale of Noah and the ark, which is universal, Deucalion built an ark, Xisithris built an ark, Manu built an ark, or in some cases it's a raft. But there's an ark. How many of you guys have seen this? How many of you have seen this?
It's in Turkey, right?
It's in Turkey, right. It's in Turkey. This was a photograph taken right at the end of World War II by an American pilot flying over, and he looked down, and in this massive landslide of alluvium, he saw this strange-looking object. What is it?
Noah's Ark.
Why would you say that?
Spaceship.
A pod.
Something hatched.
Rotting wood.
What is it? Here's another. There it is. A little closer look at it. Pardon me? It's close. It's a little too skinny for a vesica piscis, but that's good. Yeah, I like that.
Not the little thing sticking in the side.
Little thing sticking in its side. Point to what you're talking about.
On the right-hand side.
This? No, I think that's where the fundamentalist Christians dynamited it. Yeah, they did. They went there, a group of them went there in the 70s. No, they did. They dynamited it. They dynamited it to try to see if, a lot of wood fragments came out.
You know where Sitchin says the ark is? Down in Egypt.
No, actually, I've read 4 or 5 of his books. I enjoy his books, but I don't take everything he says as gospel. See, you got to bear in mind, there's a group of researchers out there, and I consider Zechariah Sitchin a prime example of the prime specimen of this kind of researcher. They find lots of really interesting discoveries because they're willing to look where mainstream scientists won't look. And then they pull it all together. Velikovsky was another one of those who kind of started the whole genre. And, here locally we had Richard Noon with his, remember 55-2000 and all that. They pull together a lot of interesting information, and they serve a really important purpose for doing that. And they get it into one place. Then they set about to explain what it means. And then that's where I think a lot of them get off track. Right. So what is that thing? By the way, the fundamentalist Christians that dynamited the side of it didn't find wood.
What'd they find?
Well, nothing, rocks. They found rocks. But if you read the biblical account, what does it say about the first thing you said out of your mouth was what, Elizabeth, when I showed you the first picture, this one? No, what made you say that? Well, this is close to a shape. Mathematically, this is not what you call a vesica piscis, because a vesica piscis has a certain relationship between length to width. It's based on the square root of 3. This thing's too skinny. This is actually closer to the Egyptian figure called the mouth of Ra, as it turns out, which is derived from the golden section. And if you guys are interested in this, we could look into this further because there's been some very interesting things. Here's a picture taken from the ground of this formation. This was excavations back, I think, in the late 50s or early 1960s when the Turkish government was going out and investigating it.
Geologists, what do you say it is so smooth?
Well, that's part of the story. I mean, it's weird, and there are some very strange things going on with the research and some of the people that were involved, some of the lead researchers going back on earlier things they said, strange characters getting involved, one of the lead researchers suddenly passing away after coming out and saying that it was who for many years advocated that it was in fact the remains of a very large boat. Okay, some of them there have been several that have said the remains of a very large boat. There was a boat that was buried in alluvium there, and because of this hull decaying, but there's more to the story than that. But that's it. Yeah.
So what would you build a ship from that would float that isn't of wood? What other
Cement. You can go to boat out of cement.
Well, here's the question, and if you want to follow this, we can pick this trail up in a month when I come back. But what does the Bible say? What was the Bible say?
It was made out of gopher wood.
Made out of gopher wood. Gimel Pei Resh was gopher wood is what they say is the unidentified wood species that the ark was supposedly made out of.
But they said they didn't find wood.
No, they didn't find wood, but when you go back to the original Hebrew of the Bible, they're not talking about wood.
What are they talking about?
Gophers.
Okay, I'm going to give you a little glimpse, and then we got to wrap it up. Okay, watch. Watch. Are you watching? That's it.
I know what it is. Yay!
Yeah, we've seen that before.
Whoop.
Yay!
What's it made out of?
Just what the Bible says it's made out of. Papyrus reeds with ferrocement, just like Charles said.
What is Pharaoh's?
Now I've never shown you any of that before, have I?
No.
Okay.
Okay, Randall,
Thank you.
bring it to a close.
What are you saying? Oh, we're done.